I didn't say I was going to be professional about it now.
Hey, it's okay. We're all family, right? Thank y'all for coming to my little session. I'm so excited. This is my first year here. My name is Heather Sawrey. I am a biologic coordinator in dermatology. One thing I love about this conference is that there's so many different specialties that are showing up, and I just love it. So kudos to you and Melissa. This is incredible. Like, I love it. I don't know if any of y'all went out in New Orleans last night. Don't, because the drinks are really, really good. Okay? And I don't know if y'all like Jill Scott. Y'all know who Jill Scott is? But we found this little bar last night, hole in the wall place, and this lady was very Jill Scottish, like from her looks and everything. So we ended up hanging out half the night. My colleague Janelle and Shaylee, they were like, "You've got to present tomorrow." I was like, "Okay, we're good." So, like I said, my name is Heather Sawrey. I've been a biologic coordinator for 15 years. For the first 14, I was in Goldsboro, North Carolina at Goldsboro Skin Center with Dr. John Jennings. And 4 years ago, he sold out to Forefront Dermatology, who's a huge corporation in the United States under dermatology. And I had always said whenever he retired, Lord willing, I wasn't going to be there long after he left. So he left last year in June. I left in September. So now I am the biologic coordinator for George Washington University Department of Dermatology for Dr. Adam Friedman. He's pretty incredible. He's a great boss. He's a great physician. He's a great speaker. I'm very busy. I support 11 providers in that practice, 7 which are residents, which if any of you have ever worked with residents, you know that's interesting, right? To say the least. There's a lot of messages that go back and forth about, okay, this is what I need in the note, this is what I need in the note, but Dr. Friedman has actually got them to where they have to write the appeal if it gets denied for information not being in the clinic notes. I'm like, yes, win for me, right? So anyway, I love dermatology. I love biologics. I love being a patient advocate, and sometimes we do get fired up, right? Like, there's some days when I was working in Goldsboro in the clinic, there were 3 of us in my little corner office, and there was a preacher's wife that sat to the right of me on the other side of the cubicle, and y'all, she was my saving grace 4 out of 5 days, because she really would check my language and my attitude. Because there's some days you just want to take that headset and squeeze it and crush it and be like, I cannot believe you just told me that. Where are you coming from, right? And now with all the new biologics coming out in dermatology, the biosimilars that are coming out, we all need the stress balls that are in our swag bags this year, right? And the little blue guy, because we're all going to have our nail imprints in it, right? Their heads are going to be ripped off. We'll probably be calling you and Melissa and saying, hey, we need a whole new gummy doll, right? So if you guys have any questions, please just raise your hand. Normally I'd say speak up, but there's a few extra people in here, so I want to be able to make eye contact with you. Please just raise your hand and ask a question. I will answer any questions you guys have, because I am not legally permitted to not say certain things in here, so that's good, right? No rules, no branded slide deck. We're happy. We're not used to that, right? So I am the president of Biologic Coordinators of Dermatology. There are several biologic coordinator groups that are coming out now, and we do love each other. We support each other. Ours is dermatology specific. I'm a co-founder, and then Shaylee Nichols is a co-founder, and Janelle Ball is a co-founder. So it was really like a love child that we come up with, but then we quickly learned it's kind of expensive to do these things, right? So we have another partner now, and we love it. So if you guys want any information on that or joining, or if y'all are in dermatology, or, you know, Elizabeth with her allergy people and asthma people, they've talked to us too. So we would love to talk to y'all if y'all want to get any information about it. Or our conference is coming up in November, the 3rd through the 5th in Orlando at the JW Marriott. So we were talking about that earlier. So if you guys have any questions about that, we'd love to talk to you about it. So we're going to talk about accessing biologics in today's insurance landscape. It's not going. Can I just hit the arrow on here?
You can. Press the. All right, Heath. I'm not that tech savvy right now. Yeah, just press the arrow.
Okay. We'll be good. Okay. So what is a biologic? I think in a lot of different specialties, you guys use biologics all day, every day, right? So we are up there. We are the ones that are fighting for the patients. Because if you think about it, before you ever went to work in that specialty or in a specialty period, Did you even know what a biologic was? I had no idea when I went into dermatology. I've been an eczema patient my whole life, and that was before Dupixent came out. Dupixent came out, and it's been incredible for me. Thank you, Jesus, for that drug. And I had no idea what biologics were. I started at the front desk at my clinic, which is a lot of biologic coordinators start at the front desk, and then they kind of either get put in that biologic coordinator position, or their boss will say, here, you can do this job or you won't have a job. So we kind of get thrown into it, which is fine. But we quickly learn that being a patient advocate is a labor of love, right? We know that. This is not really a job or a spot that we can be in and not love what we do. Every day we don't love it, right? But I will say, we all know that when we get that phone call from that patient, when everything is said and done, when we've gotten them approved, we've got them approved for patient assistance, or we get the facts that say a patient's been approved, they only have a $3 copay, or the patient has learned how to apply for a low income subsidy plan, and they call us and thank us like we're the ones that carry that plan, we invented that plan, or we invented that drug, right? It is such a huge thank you. And, I'm from North Carolina, so the days that they would bring me a casserole or bring me a bundt cake, I'm happy. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'll take it. Thank you. And then I go put it in the car because I'm not sharing it with anybody, right? So, what is a biologic? We know that a biologic is a special drug used to treat certain skin diseases to block certain receptors or proteins in the immune system. Now, mind you, I am dermatology, so for a dermatology biologic, that's what this is. So, with that being said, it's not all about dermatology, it's about the whole process. So, we're going to talk about things that we want to make sure that we have in the notes, that we have with the insurance company, so that way we can make sure that we have everything we need and we are well equipped to be able to fight for that patient and to be able to get their medication covered for them. And at the end of the day, our success story, we want it to be that the patient has the medication in hand and we're training them in the office, or they're taking the pill at home, right? That's our success story. So when I asked Dr. Freeman, I said, how would you describe a biologic? Because I always love to hear how different doctors that are speakers for different drugs, just say for Rinvoq, or when they're talking about a JAK inhibitor, or if you're talking about talks with the IL-17, I love to hear what the providers and the speakers, how they describe what that particular biologic is, or how that particular biologic works, especially with all the controversy around a JAK inhibitor. Like, I love to hear what they have to say. I'm a skin nerd, so is Shaylee, so is Janelle, so we love to just soak up everything we can about the different medications. So Dr. Freeman said it is a purposefully designed medication that was made with their condition in mind versus older meds that just broadly lowered the immune system. So just like in rheumatology, dermatology, it's always a question of, does the patient have to try and fail methotrexate, cyclosporin, azathioprine, any of those kind of systemic drugs. But in dermatology, thankfully, usually we can always find a way to get around it, to contraindicate it for the patient, or to ask them questions, or see if those medications wouldn't go well with any other medication that they're on. Brooke Jones is a physician assistant that actually got me hired at Goldsboro Skin Center. So, of course, I was like, hey, what do you call a biologic when you're talking to patients? She calls it the missing puzzle piece. Their immune system malfunctions, and this puzzle piece called a biologic makes their immune system behave correctly. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Dr. Benjamin Lockshin. He is pretty much a top provider in the nation when it comes to atopic dermatitis. When he talks about a JAK inhibitor, he talks about how it is the missing instrument in the symphony of your body, which I thought was pretty cool, right? Because when some people talk about JAK inhibitors, they can put a negative connotation on it, but I loved when I heard him talk about it, that he put it in such a classy way, right? Because when I think about Rinvoq, I don't think about it being a missing instrument, but it sure does roll a little bit sweeter off the tongue, right? So when you're talking to the patient, it makes it easier to explain it to them. So, of course, with any drug, there's office process, right? And what I love is that I believe there is someone speaking, maybe they already have, about office process and how to get there. That's you? Incredible. See, I thought it was somebody else, but I'm excited. Yeah, okay. So when you talk about office process, and this is one of Janelle's huge, huge things, she's so good at office process. Me, I'm not. I mean, I have my process, but I can't teach it very well like Janelle can. But if you have an office process, that's 50% of having your life together when you start going to the biologics, when you start dealing with the insurance, because your process is going to have to start with your clinical staff, right? You're going to have everything in place for your clinical staff so that they know what to do. They know what forms to get signed. They know exactly what needs to be in the note. And I understand that is like beating a dead horse, trying to tell your office staff from the front to the back what you need to be able to make biologics be a more seamless process for you. However, now we have all these electronic, or the EMRs where you can send messages back and forth. With dermatology, you have Emma. A lot of you guys, since you're in so many different specialties, y'all may use Epic, and I'm using Epic with the university system. It was definitely a learning curve for me after being on Emma for 10 or 11 years, and that's okay. But I've gotten to where I like it, right? You get used to it. But once you have your office process that you can explain to other people in your clinic, that will help you a whole lot to be able to get everything in order, to make it a more organized process for you and for your clinic staff. So when you have your biologic naive patients and your established biologic patients, if you have a biologic naive patient, so the providers are going to be talking to the patient about the biologics, about the side effects, what could happen, but they don't really talk to them about cost too much, right? That's where we come in. We're the meat and potatoes. Like, the providers can write it all day long, and we're very thankful that they can write it, but we know without us, without the biologic coordinators, without the advocate, these drugs are not getting in the patient's hands, right? Because as much as we love specialty pharmacy, we may rely on specialty pharmacy, that person doesn't have to talk to that patient face to face. They don't have to talk to that patient's mom, patient's dad, grandma, whoever it is, right? They don't have to deal with them face to face. A lot of times they're just a number in their system, but to us, they're real people. We know them, we know their history, we know their kids, we know when their kids play football. We might even go to their football game because we're really close with these patients and they love us. So when you have your biologic naive patients, you need to make sure that the provider has talked to them about everything, that they know that you're working for them to get the cheapest copay possible for the patient. Now, if they have Medicare, you all know that's a whole different beast, right? But we know that we're usually going to have to get a TB test for whatever drug they go on in the dermatology space. They're going to have a TB test. If they are established on biologics, we'll have to make sure that that TB test is current, right? We'll have to make sure that it's in date, because even if the drugs say they only have to have one TB test, insurance companies are still requiring to have a copy of a current TB test. So regardless of what the package insert or the safety information says, what the FDA says, they're still going to want a copy of that TB test. Regardless of, you can put the PI in your appeal all day long, it's not going to matter. They're not going to back down from it. And that's okay. Because it lowers their immune system. The biologics lower their immune system so much that we have to make sure that they don't have TB before they start. But if your patients do come back as a positive TB, I don't know if you guys have been around biologics long enough and one of the labs long enough, but several years ago they had a bad set of the TB tubes, QuantiFERON Gold. They had a bad set. We got 17 positives in 2 weeks. 17 positives. And it was years ago, but we did get about 17 positives in 2 weeks, so we had to bring all those patients back in and recheck them. But if your patients do come back with a positive TB test, that does not mean that they cannot go on this specific dermatology biologic, okay? It just means that what it's doing is putting a little stumbling block in their therapy. So we just have to reassure the patient, hey, it's okay, it's not a big deal. We just need to get you on the TB therapy, their drug regimen, and when you get to a certain point in that regimen, we'll call you and say, okay, you can start your new biologic now. We don't want them to freak out. We don't want them to have a flare, right? We don't want them to think, oh, I can't do this. We've got to reassure them, and we always say we've got to love on those patients, right? Especially in dermatology. We were at a AbbVie training several years ago, and we had breakout sessions. And the guy at our table, who was the MC of our little group, he said, I want to ask you guys, what do you think is the one thing that sets dermatology apart from every other specialty? we sat there for a minute, and I was like, it's all external, right? Like I couldn't walk up to Shaylee and say, "Oh, you have a bad heart," you know, like she doesn't. She has a beautiful heart, but I'm saying, like I couldn't walk up to her and say, "Oh, well, you have a bad heart," you know, because I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. But with dermatology, it's either going to present, you know, scales. They're going to lose their hair from alopecia. They could have just psoriasis all over their body. Maybe they have ulcerative sarcoidosis and they have these huge just lesions on their body that really, what can you do except trial and error for medications? So we want to make sure that these patients know that we're working the best that they can. And even I grew up as an asthma patient along with my atopic derm. And back then, that's when they were doing, they didn't have pulse ox back then, y'all. I couldn't tell you the number of ABGs that I had without numbing, and that was them holding me down. It was not delicious at all. It was so bad. So if we would have had somebody that could come to my mom and say, "Hey, we're going to get this theophylline for her," that's how long ago it was, theophylline and Slovia. "We're going to get this for her. Don't worry, we're going to get it at a cheap copay." It sure would have settled my mom's nerves a whole lot, right? So just that we can help these patients, help them not to freak out. Don't let them flare up. Don't let the parents worry about it. You know, we don't want to sit at work 8 to 5 and wonder how are we going to pay for our kids' medicines, right? Or even for our own medicines. So just that reassurance. My mom said she would have given her right arm and her left arm to have the reassurance that I offer patients every day, which is the same reassurance that you guys offer patients every day. It's come a long way. And again, kudos to y'all for this whole conference because it just helps everybody learn that much more. How to be the badass advocate. That was incredible. You know, and how to be just a, I mean, really a badass advocate, right? That's what we really want to do. Y'all aren't here because you don't care about it. You're here because you want to learn and you guys want to know, how can I make this process better? How can I help myself? How can we help each other? We always talk about, we always learn when we go and do programs, and Elizabeth, you're probably like this too. When we go do speaker programs, we come out smarter than we walked in, right? Because we love it when offices share their process with us and give us little nuggets that we can take back and use in our own clinic. We absolutely love it. And then for your established biologic patients, you just want to make sure that, hey, if you have to change your medication, it's okay. We just have to find something that works for you. These patients may have started back in, you know, 10 or 15 years ago, and they've come through every new and beautiful, shiny biologic drug that's come out. And that's okay. It's not because most of the time the providers just want to write that new biologic. What they want to do is find the drug that's working for the patient. What mechanism of action is working for the patient? And sometimes you do have those established patients that you've tried everything and you kind of throw up your hands and you're like, okay, we're just going to keep you on this one a little bit longer. And we have to let them know, like, hey, it's okay. We're going to find something that works for you. Remember when this drug worked for 7 years? Maybe this one will work for another 7, right? But for both patients, there is a way that the biologic drugs have to be accessed for the patient, whether they're Medicare, whether they're commercial, or whether they're self-pay, right? And in my geography, the Medicare patients, we have a lot of Medicare patients, and we also have um, a lot of high income in the geography that I work in the DC, Maryland, Arlington, Virginia area. So I have to give the phone call to these patients a lot, like, hey, I'm sorry, but you just have too much income. You know, is there a way that we can look at your income? Can we look at your Part D plan? Can we look and see what we can pay for you? You know, and for some patients, if they have $100 copay on their biologic for Medicare patients, that might be a lot for them every month, right? I mean, $100 is $100. You know, and if it's $50 for a Medicare patient, $50 is a lot, right? So that's where we step in. We know where we can look at to different foundations. We can look into different networks and say, oh, well, do you have any money available for this patient? Do you have any money available for this patient? So we want to make sure that we know how that we can go about accessing the prescribed biologic for the patient. So we know once the provider writes the prescription for the drug, we're going to send it in, whether you guys e-prescribe. If you use the support center for that particular drug, a lot of companies like Eli Lilly, they call it the hub. We call it the support center because sometimes the word hub might have a negative connotation with it. I don't know if any of y'all are in dermatology, but several years ago, a new biologic came out, and their hub was like, they called it the hub. we called it, Dear Lord, do we have to talk to them again? Right? So we like to kind of just throw the word support center with that, because it not only supports the patient, but more importantly, these support centers, these hubs, they're going to support you, right? They're there. They work for you. They're like the specialty pharmacy. They work for you. Your field reimbursement managers. I know we have one in here. Is there any other field reimbursement managers in here? Oh, incredible. Yo, we love y'all. We love y'all. Our BCOD conference this year is actually focusing on field reimbursement managers. So kudos to y'all, because we know that you are our wingmen, wing women. We rely on you guys heavily. So thank you for all that you do. Y'all are incredible. And thank you for being here. That's huge. That's so awesome. I love this, y'all. I'm just so excited. My heart is so warm about this whole thing. So, what do we do when the provider decides which biologic is suitable for our patient? So, we know the provider is going to talk to the patient about the biologic. Hey, this is why I decided on this drug for you, and this is why I think this is good for you. I love it when providers make that decision themselves. They do not rely on the nursing staff to make that decision. They do not walk into the biologic coordinator office and say, hey, this is the insurance they have. What can we get for them? Right? What I love is a provider that walks in there and says, this is what I want for this patient. And we love for the biologic coordinators and the nurses to be so educated with each drug that they can say, no problem, whatever you want, we'll get it for you. Right? Whether it's going to be through the bridge program for commercially insured patients, or whether it's going to be, if it has to go through patient assistance or PAP, right? Lovingly, we call it PAP. So I've heard so many nurses say, well, my doctor puts them on whatever drug I say to put them on. And my response to that is, well, you're not an MD, so I hope you made the right decision, right? Did you look at everything that goes on with that drug? But we want everyone in the clinic who's working with that doctor, biologic coordinator, nurse, to know, okay, well, you want to put this patient on an IL-17, this is what this insurance is going to require, right? So first of all, we want to know, do you guys use, would the clinic be using specialty pharmacy? Because as you FRMs know, and some of you other advocates may know, is that there are so many specialty pharmacies that will offer a full, complete concierge service for the clinic, meaning from the time you send in the form to the specialty pharmacy, or if you e-prescribe, whichever way you do, you send in notes with all of that information with the prescription, they're going to go ahead and do the prior authorization, right? And if it gets denied, you're going to notify the specialty pharmacy that it did get denied, and more than likely that same specialty pharmacy is going to do the appeal for you or for the clinic, right? There are some specialty pharmacies that whenever they do a benefit investigation for that drug, if they see that they cannot fill that drug, then they'll let the clinic know now that, hey, we can't even fill this drug. We're not going to do the PA for you, much less the appeal. And I think it did upset some offices when that happened, but it just let them start using other different specialty pharmacies that do offer that full concierge service. Like, I get it on the specialty pharmacy side. I get it from what they're saying because we're so involved in industry. We understand. However, I also understand the frustration on the biologic coordinator side, especially if you've been using said specialty pharmacy for 4 or 5 years. Right? One of the huge national specialty pharmacies did this last year, and we got so many calls from biologic coordinators that were like, hey, what specialty pharmacy are you going to use? What do you use? Which one do you use? I do my own prior authorizations unless I can't help it, but I do a lot of my own prior authorizations. I don't rely on specialty pharmacy to do that, and especially appeals. Shaylee made a good point on she did a virtual program today at lunch. She made a great point that if specialty pharmacy is doing appeals for your patient or for your clinic's patient, then maybe we didn't send enough clinic notes to show that the patient has tried and failed methotrexate maybe 10 years ago. So when the specialty pharmacy is doing the appeal, they didn't have that note. They didn't know that. So the denial is that the patient hasn't done systemic therapy. When they did the appeal from specialty pharmacy, they didn't put in the information that patient has tried and failed systemic therapy. So you had that first level denial, which in turn makes us have to do a second level denial if that bridge program requires us to do that. So we think that if you do your own appeals, it's a lot easier because, like I said, you know your patient personally, right? You guys could probably think of 5 patients that you've been with for 10 years. You know You know their family, you know their wives, you know their parents, you've been to their grandparents' funerals. There's one patient in Goldsboro, he quit coming, but he used to call me. He would say, "Hey Heather," I'm like, "Hey Mr. Gary, how you doing?" He said, "I'm fine as a hair in a biscuit, y'all." That's probably one of the nastiest things I've ever heard in my life. And you know, we hear some pretty dirty, like gross stuff in dermatology and smell it and all that, but I'm telling you, I was like, you know what? Just tell me what you need. I'm busy. I can't talk about you and your hairy biscuit. I just can't do it today. So you have the specialty pharmacy you can use. Also the support centers or the hubs if you want to send the enrollment form, the drug specific manufacturer enrollment form into the support center, then they're going to go ahead and do the benefit investigation for you, right? If you get the prior authorization approved, then they can triage that prescription to the mandated specialty pharmacy. If it gets denied, then if they have a house specialty pharmacy, they'll go ahead and fill it through that house specialty pharmacy, or they'll send it to one of their enhanced specialty pharmacies that can fill it for the patient. It's kind of going to be up to you how you want that to go, but they do that benefit verification. Just remember for your offices, if you're not working in a clinic and you work with a clinic like FRMs do, support centers will help with prior authorizations, but they will not do prior authorizations for the clinic like a specialty pharmacy will, right? They'll help the patient get enrolled in a copay card like the specialty pharmacy, but they will not do the prior authorizations, nor can they do the appeals as well. They can help with all of that, but what I always tell my offices that I talk to, or nurses that I talk to, or biologic coordinators that I talk to, is before you even reach out to the hub, call your field reimbursement manager, call your field reimbursement access specialist, call your field access specialist. There's an acronym for every company out there that's different. FROS, FRM, y'all know. All of y'all probably have a different acronym, right? So we always say reach out to your field reimbursement manager. They are for you guys know, y'all are specific geography. You're very intimate with your clinics. You know the patients. You know that Heather Sawrey is having a problem getting her talks. You know exactly what's lacking from that office. So if you're working in the clinic, when you call your field reimbursement manager, you can say, "Hey, I have a question about one of Dr. Friedman's patients," and they're probably already going to know before you even tell them. "Hey, you're having a problem with this," right? And there is some hubs that do not function as well as others, and we recognize that, right? And we try to advocate for that as well. I'm sure Elizabeth has had calls, scathing emails that, "Hey, this is not working right." As a matter of fact, we have a call on Friday because we all complained about one particular hub and how it's just not rolling very well. So hopefully if you guys voice your opinions, if you work in a clinic, voice your opinion to your field reimbursement manager, right? And then the field reimbursement manager can run it up the flagpole, and hopefully changes will be made. Everybody will try to make improvements in that hub, because the hub is only going to run as smooth as they know when things are going wrong, right? And yes, I said it. Sometimes, like I said, I'll be like, "Where did you come from? Can you please put me on with somebody else?" Okay. And I'm not gonna lie, if I have to call into a hub sometimes and one particular person answers, I will hang up and call back. I'm not above it. Same thing with TRICARE, prior authorization department. If I call to do a PA, y'all know if you deal with TRICARE, sometimes it's tough anyway, right? So there's one lady that answers, and I'm like, click. I don't care if I have to call 4 times. I'm not talking to her. Nope. I'm just not gonna do it. Or you can e-prescribe. When offices e-prescribe, then that's going to set everything in motion from the specialty pharmacy. Some specialty pharmacies will go ahead and send you the PA form to the clinic. Some will just send you a key for Cover My Meds, whatever their process is. That's great. At least they're letting you know that it needs to be done. I think with dermatology, the number one and number two, the specialty pharmacy and the hub support are probably 90% of what people do. Um, in my clinic, they would just send it to specialty pharmacy with no forms, no anything. So when we started on a new EMR in November, there were still Humira patients that have been waiting since April for their hidradenitis suppurativa. And if you know anything about that, you know that AbbVie has Humira. It's the only drug that's FDA approved for hidradenitis. So there's no reason in this world that it should have been sitting since April. So sometimes when you e-prescribe, it might be a little bit of a hiccup because we rely on the electronic platform, to communicate with our clinic. And if you work in a clinic like I do, we get over 2,000 faxes a day just in dermatology. So it's a lot to go through. So we kind of rely on the field reimbursement managers too to call and say, hey, we need a PA for this patient. So that might kind of be the problem with just e-prescribing, is that the communication might fall through the cracks, right? So what exactly is specialty pharmacy and what exactly do they do? I'm glad you asked, right? So we've talked a lot about specialty pharmacy, what they can help you with. One thing I always like to tell our clinics that we speak to, people that ask us all the time about specialty pharmacy, is that specialty pharmacy works for you, right? We love a specialty pharmacy that even if they're a national specialty pharmacy like CVS, or if they're a little mom and pop that comes out of North Carolina called Relo Specialty Pharmacy, whichever one you go for, we like to let you guys know they do work for the clinic. They work for the patient, right? So have a representative from that specialty pharmacy that you can call, that one person. And I know all the time they're in and out of the clinic in DC. They're like, oh, use us, use us, use us. And with Janelle and Shaylee, where, it gets to the point to where you kind of have to say, look, if you want to talk to me, please make an appointment. Because there's just so many. And especially if you work in a provider's office in your specialty that they call their gold star provider, you know that every day it's in and out, in and out, in and out all day. And as an FRM, you guys can tell what day the provider is there because you walk in and there's 10 people with their briefcases out in the weight room, right? So you know. So whenever we talk to people about specialty pharmacy, we like to tell them just make sure you fill out the form completely. Have your clinic fill out the form completely. For my clinic, the nurses just fill out the patient's name, and if the patient has to sign it, they sign it, and they get the provider to sign it, and then they fax it to me. And then I just fill out all the rest of it because I want to make sure that form is filled out completely and correctly. One thing I always forget though, y'all, is so small, is the date. I always forget the date, so I always say, do as I say, not as I do, right? So make sure you have that form filled out completely and in its entirety, and know that when you fax it in, if you want them to do the prior authorization for you to be able to access that medication for the patient, go ahead and fax in all the notes that you want to fax. If you want to fax in 10 years of notes, do it. They'll probably hate you, but it's okay. At least you'll have all that information, and you won't have that denial on file from 10 years ago where they didn't try a particular therapy that they had to try, right? They have all the notes. They have it all there. So once specialty pharmacy does that prior authorization for the clinic, whenever it's approved or denied, the specialty pharmacy will never know until we let the pharmacy know. They're considered a third party, and insurance will not talk to them, right? They will not talk to them at all because they're considered a third party. So if it's denied, our clinic will need to call and notify the specialty pharmacy or fax that copy of the prior authorization denial into specialty pharmacy. So that way they'll have it. They can go ahead and start working on the appeal. Right, so most drugs will go ahead and let the patient get on bridge program if they're commercially insured, and then they can go ahead and start drug while that appeal is being worked on. There are a few drugs out there that the patient cannot start on the drug until you have that first level appeal denial. But hopefully your specialty pharmacy will have enough information in the notes that they can go ahead and get that patient approved. Personally, when I win an appeal, I love it. I absolutely love it, especially if it's a second level appeal. I know y'all feel me because some days I feel like I've gotten 7 denials in a row, and then I get that appeal overturned where I've won, and I'm like, I still got it. I still got it. It feels good. It feels good. My husband is like, why are you smiling? I'm like, you wouldn't even understand. It's okay. I just won that one. It was like, okay. You know. So, specialty pharmacies, like I said, they work on the behalf of the patients and for you. They deal with many different types of medicines, and they may help do prior authorizations, appeals, and offer dedicated patient support. There are some pharmacies that have a social worker for every single drug that they do, which I think is incredible, that you can send the prescription or the form to that pharmacy, and then they'll have that social worker work on it for the patient, especially if it's a Medicare patient. Most of the time, specialty pharmacies that have these social workers in place, they can tell you who has money available for your specialty and who does not have money for your specialty. Because we know in dermatology, most of the foundations, if you don't have your inpatient enrolled by January 3rd, they're going to be out of money. And that's just how it happened. That's just how it is. I don't know about in other specialties, but with dermatology, that's how it is. And you just have to kind of look for other options for the patient, whether it's manufacturer, patient assistance, or if maybe there's a new foundation that has come out. But for your commercially insured patients, we know that as sure as the sun is going to come up, we're going to have to do a prior authorization, right? And I always say, if you're in dermatology, triamcinolone, which is one of the oldest topicals in the book, steroids, still requires a prior authorization. So we know that one of these high dollar biologics are going to require prior authorization as well. And now, these days, prior authorizations can be done via phone. You can fax the form in with notes, or we can use an electronic platform like Cover My Meds. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Cover My Meds, and if you're not, they'll be at the reception tonight. You can talk to them about their platform. Cover My Meds and I have a love-hate relationship, but the fact that if you've ever used Cover My Meds, you've probably already had to use their little chat option with their people in the bottom right hand corner. I love that option because for instance, if I did a PA and I'm following up on it, we're on business day 8, we should have a response back by now. Then you can type into them and say, hey, can you give me the phone number for the PA department for whatever that key is? And they'll come back and give you that phone number. And they're 98% of the time they're spot on with their phone numbers, that they can give you the right phone number to the right department, because there's not much more maddening than thinking you have the right phone number and calling and having to speak to 8 different people who don't know what they're talking about, and then they send you back to the very first person. So the Cover My Meds is a great option to do prior authorizations. They can help you out. And you can upload all the notes that you want to on Cover My Meds, which is great. Being able to upload it and not have to fax it. If you guys are on the Epic system, you guys know that faxing notes is not always the easiest thing on there to, whether you're faxing it to a PA department or wherever. There are some insurances, I will admit, that if you just call and do their PA over the phone, it's a lot easier than even getting involved on Cover My Meds or trying to fax it in and waiting on the fax to come back. And like I said, with all the faxes that we get through in our clinic, I can't go through them every day. So if I can do it on Cover My Meds and have that real time, where I just have to wait 24 hours for a response, I'll take it, to not have to go through all those faxes. So for the hub support services or the support center, they do give you and your patient overall support. The majority of them, if it is an injectable drug, they offer injection training, drug education for your patients. They all have clinical pharmacists or registered nurses on file that they do not give medical advice to your patients. They simply empower them, if they're having a medical problem, to call your clinic back or to call their provider back and let them know what's going on. They also offer sharps disposal, which I think this is incredible because we have Stericycle. So if all of our biologic patients were bringing back their sharps to put in there, they charge the clinic by weight. And I always say, if they bring theirs back and dig into the profit of the clinic, we're not going to get a raise, right? So let's use those sharps disposals, right? And the majority of the hubs offer, when they send the patient a brand new sharps container, they'll also send them a box or a bag that the postage is already paid, that they just stick it in that container and they send it on back in their mailbox. They don't have to take it to the post office. They don't have to take it to FedEx, UPS. They make it that easy for the patient. I think it's an incredible service that they offer. And also through the hub or the support center is where your FRM access is going to come from, because your FRM is your HIPAA certified entity. So the majority of the time for these drugs, unless you have a business associate agreement on file with these companies, you have to have a patient signature so that the FRM can help you guys and that the hub can help you guys as well. Do you have any questions so far? Everybody good? Nobody's asleep. That's incredible. I'm doing good. So once we get the drug approved for the patient, what has to happen? Oh, well, you guys know they need to answer the phone from the specialty pharmacy, right? That's one main thing. I think we have always talked about nationally, that is the #1 hiccup for patients not receiving their drug, right? Patients will come in and say, I haven't heard from specialty pharmacy, but we'll pick up the phone and call. Let's say we'll call CVS and say, hey, patient says y'all haven't reached out to him. Oh, well, we called Miss Sawrey on January 6th at 12:18. We left a voicemail. We called her 2 weeks later. We called her 2 more weeks later. We never received a phone call back. Specialty pharmacy has no reason to lie to us. Right now, there is the rare occasion that maybe somebody within the specialty pharmacy keyed the wrong phone number, but that doesn't happen very often unless we put it wrong on the enrollment form. Right? And sometimes it's happened to me a couple of times. I've done it. But we want to make sure that the prescription is sent to the correct specialty pharmacy. Most days, you guys know now that all insurances, well, the majority of them have a mandated specialty pharmacy. We can love it, we can hate it, but there's nothing we can do about it. It is what it is, and that's the game we have to play with the insurance company. Make sure we let the patient know that it's been approved, or the patient's caregiver. Let them know if they qualify for a copay card. I let the patients know about the copay card, but I also tell them it's up to them to get enrolled with the copay card, because let me tell you why. We are doing so much work for this patient. Okay, it takes what, maybe 2 or 3 minutes to get enrolled with a copay card. It's super simple for the patient. It doesn't take long. They can do it. Specialty pharmacy can help them with it. I'll give them the phone number to call. But they need to get that done, because if they want to pay $400 for a Tremfya shot, then let them. I would much rather enroll in that copay card and get it for $5, right? So if they want to spend that money and not take the time and enroll in the copay card, I always say they have more money than they have sense, right? Because if you can have a $5 copay for an injectable that's thousands of dollars, then they could do it. But other than that, I'm not going to do it. Another thing that I love that specialty pharmacies have put into place in the past several years is that the patient has to speak to the specialty pharmacy for their shipment. Okay. That they have to talk to the specialty pharmacy. Whenever I started in dermatology, I could order the shipment for them and have it sent to their home. Not now, and I absolutely love it, because I've had more arguments than one about where FedEx left their box. I had no control over it, even though the patient knew. I couldn't help it, they left it at the end of their driveway. That is not my problem, right? You knew it was coming, right? And then with the injection training, they help with that, and also make sure you have follow-up appointments. One of the main things with accessing biologics with insurances today is the chart notes. It's all in the details, right? If it's not in the chart note, then it didn't happen. We know that, right? If it's not put there by the provider, then it didn't happen. So when we're talking about dermatology, the information that has to be in the chart note, because insurances are going to ask for it every time, is the body surface area, the PGA score for psoriasis, and the IGA score for atopic derm, anything they've tried and failed, or why they're contraindicated, if they've tried and failed light therapy or phototherapy, any topical steroids or topical calcineurin inhibitors that they've tried. And also a body map is optional if you need it for the patient. But we always say, and we have a faculty meeting, I meet with the providers every month on a virtual call, and I preach this every month. And y'all know how it is. You just can't always tell everybody, you tell them all the time. And now that Lilly has come out with Illumient for alopecia with their new SALT score, which is the score on the percentage of hair loss that the patient has, every insurance wants to know that SALT score. It has to be in the note. So that came along after I wrote this deck. So if you guys are in dermatology, the SALT score has to be in the note for Illumient to even be considered for the alopecia areata. What does SALT stand for? We don't know. Good question. With the SALT score, it is the percentage of hair loss that they have. So if they have a SALT score of 20%, they have 20% hair loss. If they have, and it just goes with the percentages. And most, yes, it's all capital letters, SALT. If you get with me when we're done in here, I have a printout on my phone that I can tell you what it is. Yeah, so whatever percentage of their hair loss is, and most insurances want to see a hair loss of at least 50% on the SALT score. There we go. I knew somebody would know it right quick. Thank you, Janelle. So if the drug's denied, why was it denied? Pay attention to the appeal time frame. If you can do a peer-to-peer, a lot of insurances allow the nurses or biologic coordinators to do the peer-to-peer, which I think is incredible, because now we don't have to schedule a time to pull a provider out of the room to do a peer-to-peer. And we can do a peer-to-peer with a pharmacist, not with a brand match specialist, because, I don't want a cardiologist looking at a dermatology review. Right? So that's a big thing that we have now. going on. So whenever I do, if I have to write an appeal and I'm not able to do a peer-to-peer, I do include in that appeal, please have this appeal reviewed by a brand matched dermatologist. And if I get an appeal decision back that's denied from like a cardiothoracic surgeon, I send it right back and say this was not reviewed by a dermatologist. Please have it reviewed by a dermatologist and, respond back accordingly. And it works. They might still be denied, but it still works. And then for the commercially insured patients, you have the Bridge program, which is a free drug program offered by the manufacturers that the patient can enroll in for free drug. Some of them have a 1 year time frame, 2 year time frame, 3 year time frame, and then Janssen does not have a time limit at all for Tremfya, which is really good. Only, yeah, right, only for commercially insured patients. So we want to talk about a reasonable time frame for patients to be approved for their biologics. Hopefully, the PA response should take no longer than 3 days, especially if you do it on Cover My Meds. 2 to 3 weeks for an approval is unacceptable, which is why we have to kind of keep our eye on it. Make yourself a task in your EMR, or if you're like me, I have tasks in my EMR, but I have more sticky notes than I have anything. Like they're everywhere in my home office. Like I love whoever invented Post-its. Right, and then also denials can hold up a therapy start. So we want to make sure that we have all the information we possibly can to do that prior authorization. Now, if it's an exclusion, we can't help that, right? We can argue about why we want them to approve it, but if it's an exclusion, there's nothing we can do about it. But we want to make sure that we get the appeals done as soon as possible so that that patient can hopefully be approved or either go into the Bridge program. And y'all, we know that biologics, accessing biologics, even if it's not a biologic that you're doing for your patient, any drug, right? It can be tough, it can be exhausting, frustrating, maddening. We talked about slinging your headset across the room. Well, I do. Maybe not y'all, but I do some days. But we know that when we help our patients and they get better, it is worth every single bit of work that we do for that patient, right? There's some patients that call my phone and I don't call them back till 4:58 p.m. because I just can't deal with them that particular day. But I do go ahead and start my day working on it the very next day because I know that they need their drug. And if I needed my Dupixent, I don't want somebody to put my drug care off just because they think it's a tough thing to do. But we do, y'all. We change lives, right? We make their life better, whether it's oncology or asthma, pulmonary, allergy, whatever it is. Dermatology. We make it so we can change their lives. Maybe they have the days that they can go to the beach with their kids and not have an asthma attack because they're on whatever medicine you get approved, or they can get in the ocean because the biologic we got approved for them has cleared their skin up that much that now they can actually stand the salt. They can. I live in a baseball belt, so they can go to their baseball game when it's 102 degrees outside because now they can tolerate the sweat, right? So we're changing lives. It's helping their family. It's not just helping the patient, right? And we change attitudes. If they look good, then they're going to feel better. Well, in dermatology anyway. I love Botox, but we're not talking about Botox looking good. We're talking about, dermatology looking good. And if they can breathe well, if they can move, like if you're rheumatology, if the patient can get out of bed that day and actually feel good and pour their own orange juice, right? It makes a huge difference with that patient and how they go about their day. So I hope you guys have enjoyed everything we talked about, and that's everything. Yay! You might have any questions about Bridge program or anything, or
I mean, I'm gonna ask questions if no one else is.
go ahead.
Okay, so come from two different backgrounds, right? Medical benefit, pharmacy benefit.
Yes.
Do you find that you have a success with payer portals for submitting prior auths? Like going directly to Cigna, Cigna uses Cover My Meds now, but like UHC links, stuff like that. Do you guys have success with those?
No, not with medical versus pharmacy benefit. My best bet with medical versus pharmacy benefit, for example, Illumia is a drug. It's an IL-23. For us, 80% of the time it's covered on the medical benefit, but 20% of the time it's covered on pharmacy. It just depends on the plan. Botox for hyperhidrosis, which is not a biologic, but same difference. It could be covered on the pharmacy benefit. It could be covered on the medical benefit. And I have no luck going through payer portals. I always have better luck going through phone calls to do those PAs. Absolutely. And I also rely heavily on hubs to do the benefit investigation to find out, like for Illumia, if it's covered on the medical benefit or if it's covered on the pharmacy benefit. So hubs a lot of times can cut that guessing game out for the clinic. But even so, the payer portal is not my jam, usually, ever, ever. Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank y'all for coming.